Good morning. Hello, 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 hello. I'm not even wearing a hat today. What have we come to? I've got so much flour and dough on me from baking, which you shouldn't bake in clericals apparently, but here I am. Um, hey, I have so many questions today. I sent out a plea on Facebook last night saying, "Hey, by the way, I'm opening this one, but I got to finish this one." If this was the 50s, these would be cigarettes, but they're not. This is the 20s, so it's Diet Coke. I sent out some pleas on Facebook last night saying, what do you guys want to know about? What questions do you want to ask me? Let's have some hardballs, and I got some hardball questions. So I'm excited about that. It's going to be, let's see if I can solve the problems of the world. Welcome, Anne, to Ask a Priest. Anne is, I think, a first-time joiner. So good to have you with us. Good to have you here. Betsy and Lisa's back in action. So this is good. Oh, y'all, I'm so excited about, okay, well, let's get to work. Let's get to these questions. We're going to solve the problems of the world, but I'm going to pull them up on my phone. So when I pull up, I'm not like on my phone, like, hold on, give me a second. I'm just going to talk to someone here. But I said, listen, ask me anything and I have to answer it. And so throw me some rough questions. And people did. So a guy named Donald Edwards, Don Edwards. Now, normally, if we're on Facebook with each other, I know you. But I don't know how I know Don, and yet somehow he's a Facebook friend. So let's see if that stays true after whatever I say today. Don asked a couple of questions that seem interesting and thoughtful. His first question was, why do Protestant churches get named after saints when saints serve no role as intercessors and there is no mechanism for new saints to be canonized? This is a very Catholic question. I am not much of a Catholic. Why do Protestant churches get named after saints when saints serve no role as intercessors and there is no mechanism for new saints to be canonized? What an interesting question. And so we're going to delve right into the church nerdiest stuff you could possibly nerd out about. Questions about naming churches after saints and sainting people and canonizing and intercessories and the intercession of saints. It really doesn't get church nerdier than those questions. And Lisa's already asking, well, is that the function of saints, intercessors? And Kathy Baggett's here, by the way. She's never on the live chat, but she's with us as well. All right, let's get to it. I don't know the answer. How about that? I have no idea why Protestant churches name the things they name their churches after, but I do want to say a couple things about saints. I grew up in a Protestant church. I grew up in a denomination that is a Lutheran denomination called the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod, and my church growing up was St. John's. There was also a St. Paul's nearby. They also had churches named after things like Prince of Peace and Salem, and I'm forgetting what else, but mostly St. John and St. Paul's. You would very rarely find in a Lutheran church that was named after anyone but John or Paul. Certainly, you're not going to find a St. James Lutheran church in that because they don't because Luther wasn't a big fan of James. But that's a whole other. Okay, let's talk about saints. I didn't grow up in a tradition that acknowledged the intercession of saints. And nor did we have any process for canonization because we didn't really believe in canonization as a thing. The term saint is something for us to pay a lot of attention to, but I'm going to come to the term saint in a second. My understanding, by and large, would be if a church is going to name themselves after, whether it be a saint or anything else, that it would be because they would hope that name would in some way embody the spirit of that particular congregation or that particular plant. So my previous church was named after St. John the Divine, and St. John the Divine is a name that's given in reference to John the Revelator, John who wrote Revelation. And so we did a lot of work actually in my congregation thinking about how being named after John the Revelator, what was our duty to honor that. We actually never talked about it in terms of any concept of being of John the Divine as an intercessor in our particular lives, because we're dirty proddies, I guess. But we did it. We then said, okay, so what is the character of John the Divine, and if we're going to be a community that's named after that person, then how do we? Good morning, Leslie Martin. Good to have you with us. We're talking about why Protestant churches would name themselves after saints. Someone asked if they don't buy into the intercession of saints or have a mechanism for canonization. Why do that? And my basic answer was I have no idea. But I do know what it means for churches that have saint names, how we can interact with that saint, and how we can try to shape and form our community. After that, I know that my first church out of seminary was St. Margaret's. St. Margaret of Scotland was a queen of Scotland who did a lot of work, not only in terms of conversion of people in Scotland, but had a huge impact on the community of the poor in Scotland. And so quite often the Church of St. Margaret's would, when we would think about what kind of work we wanted to do, would try to emulate Margaret of Scotland and think about what it meant for us to be involved in particular with people who were poorer in our community, and how we could kind of think in terms of living into her spirit. And then my church after that was St. John the Divine. And so again, I was talking about how I really led that congregation into some thinking about what it meant for us to be ones who revealed God's love. I preached a sermon recently for a friend of mine at his church. Well, not recently now, because no one goes anywhere, but it was back when we went places. And his church was St. Mary the Virgin. And I talked to the congregation about being named after St. Mary, not in terms of how she might intercede for them, though many of them may believed in that, because in the Episcopal Church, there are some who believe in the intercession of saints. But talking about what it would mean to, if you're named after something, how do you shape and pattern the life of your congregation to live out the reality of that saint? So I talked about Mary being the one who birthed Jesus into the world. What would it look like for a community to understand themselves as one who carried Jesus within their womb and then birthed Jesus out into the world? How would they pattern the life of that community were that the case? Redeemer, I'm now at Church of the Redeemer. And so we talk a lot about redemption. We talk a lot about participating in the redemption of the world. That word redemption, understanding the Redeemer is Jesus, of course, and Redeemer is his role as Redeemer. That term redeem is in scriptural language, has direct ties to purchasing someone out of slavery. The redemption price is the price to redeem someone, is to buy them freedom, literally. So Jesus as Redeemer is the liberator. Redemption is not, sometimes we hear the word redemption is like, well, that sucked, but this redeemed it at the end, which is to say, like, something was terrible, but then one good thing kind of made the whole thing worthwhile. But redemption is actually about the claiming, our being claimed by God, and the price that's paid to liberate us from the slavery to sin and evil, to which all humans are subject. So then, if we are going to name ourselves that, then if we were going to name ourselves that, then we would want to look at, since we're named Redeemer, we want to think about what it looks like to participate in that liberating, life-giving love. How do we participate in and articulate the redemption of God in Jesus Christ, or the redemption of the world in Jesus Christ, that God's redeeming of the world? And what does it mean to be redeemed? What does it mean to participate in the redemption of others, right? So if you were named after St. John's or St. Mark's, what you might want to do is think about that particular gospel, and how that particular gospel, what is that particular gospel's flavor, tone, and what are the major themes of that particular gospel? And then ask that, knowing that, what would it look like to live that out in the world as a community devoted to expressing that particular truth about Jesus is the thing that we want to think about. So I've never even thought about churches as a dirty proddy. I've never even thought about churches being named after saints because it was our job to pray. It was their job to intercess for us. Now, that being said, let me say a thing about intercession. I am not at all in any way, shape, or form opposed to people praying through saints or asking saints for intercession. I want us to understand a couple of things about the communion of saints as Christians. The term saint is a name that comes from sanctified one. And the term to be sanctified, and this is really actually, this sounds like, do I care about this? You're thinking? You do. You actually totally care about this. I don't know if you knew this. You super care. So Paul calls people saints a lot, actually. Do you know who he's referring to? Anyone who's been baptized. That's who Paul describes as the saints. In his letters, he refers to church members as saints because they are sanctified ones, set apart ones. To be sanctified is a term that means to similar to be consecrated. To be sanctified is to be set apart and cleansed for holy usage. It's not sanctification. To be sainted, to be a saint, is to be in baptism set apart for the work of God in Jesus Christ. It's not a conferral of any sort of inherently. It doesn't mean anything that you're a better person or amazing or that you've done even a certain number of things. That is a later development in Roman Catholic sort of piety. And the recognition that certain people live lives that are worth modeling ourselves after or patterning ourselves after. I don't think that's inherently bad, just for the record. I really don't. But I do have a problem with us creating a sense that saints are something that isn't us. That, Lisa, I don't know the difference off the top of my head between sanctification and consecration. Will you Google that and write it and tell us while I'm talking? Because nobody wants to watch me Google stuff. How do we differentiate between sanctification and consecration? But this idea of being a saint is the idea of that we have this idea that being a saint is that it's for other people that aren't us. So we're no saints is what you'll hear someone say, or I'm no saint, or if someone's particularly great, we say they're a saint. When we use that language, we are kind of jumping into the Roman Catholic vernacular of the idea that a person has to have lived a specific kind of life that is so model that they get recognized formally by the church organization as such, and in the Catholic canonization that includes having performed specific miracles and that can be essentially certified miracles, right? But the reality is that the biblical concept of sainthood is all those who have been called to do this work before us. The saints are all those who have gone before, and the saints are us right now in the church who are doing this work. Okay, Lisa's got some work for us. As verbs, the difference between consecrate and sanctify: consecrate is to declare or otherwise make something holy, while sanctify is to make holy, to consecrate, to set aside. So they're pretty similar. So when I use them interchangeably, I'm not totally wrong. That makes me happy. I love when I'm not totally wrong. Not totally wrong is like the lane I want to drive in. Okay. We consecrate or sanctify the elements, we say, of bread and wine before we take communion. And then after we've done that, anything that hasn't been consumed must be either consumed separately or gotten rid of in a ritualistic manner. You can't take consecrated bread from communion and then if there's some left over, make a sandwich and just make a grilled cheese. Why? Because you'll go to hell? Well, that's above my pay grade. But because we understand that there are things that once we have set them aside for specific use for specific religious purposes to honor God, that once it's been set aside for that, it should not be used for anything else. That's why it exists. Okay. So if that's the case, if you think about yourself that way, as a baptized one, a sainted one, you have been set apart for holy usage by God. You are now a vessel for God's blessing. And you'll say, well, so if I hadn't been baptized, then I wouldn't be, God wouldn't use me. Just put that aside for a second. Look, we know God uses all sorts of people. God can do whatever God wants to do. We know that. If you are a baptized person, you're a saint. You have been set apart to do the work of Jesus in the world. You have been set apart devoted to the work of Jesus in the world. This is what it means to be Christian. To be Christian, to be baptized into the death of Christ so that we might share in the resurrected life of Christ, is to begin to live out that resurrected life, to seek to participate with God in the answering of the Lord's Prayer. What do I mean by that? You pray the Lord's Prayer, right? Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Right? Give us this day our daily bread. Forgive us our trespasses as we forgive those who trespass against us. To be baptized is to be charged and set apart with the work of participating with God in the inbreaking of the kingdom. The sovereignty, the reign of God being brought to bear on this earth. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, so that earth looks more like heaven. That is your job now. To help making sure other people have their daily bread, to forgive people's trespasses and seek your own forgiveness. This is the work for which you have been set apart. Now, I've said a bunch of stuff that means maybe I don't believe in canonized saints. I probably don't, to be completely honest. That being said, Mary, Mother of God, actual human being, actual faithful human being, whose faith and her works have been recognized, not just formally, but informally throughout the history of the Christian faith. According to our scriptures, she is alive in Christ right now. And the idea of asking for this saint of God, this set apart one of God, to intercede on my behalf, I don't find that offensive or problematic at all. It makes lovely sense to me. Well, Phil, why would I ask Mary to pray for me if I can just pray to God myself, you say? Yes, that is a good question. To which I respond quite flippantly, have you ever asked anyone to pray for you? Ever? In your whole life, have you ever asked anyone to pray for you? You have? If you have ever asked anyone to pray for you, then why would you have a problem with someone asking Mary to pray for them? Do you think she's dead? Our scriptures suggest otherwise. We believe that those who have died in Christ are alive in Christ and present with God in the kingdom. They are part of the communion of saints. Read the letter to the Hebrews. I mean, you should just read the letter to the Hebrews daily anyway. It's so good. But understand that the description of the lives of those who've gone before us, who have taught us about the faith, and those lives of people who've lived the life of faith, that they are now a cloud of witnesses who are cheering us on as we run this earthly race. We run this earthly race right now. We are the ones who are in the midst of our the great competition that is life, and not competition as in I win and you lose, but competition is in like the marathon that we have to run, the test. And I'm going to be, I've asked about, someone asked a question about being tested by God. We'll talk about that in a little bit, but like our mettle is being tested, so to speak. Our lives are we're part of this struggle. And our scriptures, and particularly Hebrews, suggests that those who have gone before are not divorced from our struggle, but are actually intimately involved, watching, not in a voyeuristic or even a judgmental way. But imagine that you have people cheering you on and rooting for you. And if you were to ask those people to pray for you, why wouldn't they? And why wouldn't you ask them? This is the best argument I know of for the intercession of saints. And I think it's powerful. I think it's beautiful. I confess that I have a very meager intimacy, a very meager interaction with the saints in that traditional language of intercessory prayer. Growing up in the tradition in which I was raised, I would pray directly to God, and was taught that doing anything else was inherently bad. useless at best, idolatry at worst. And I've come to a different place about it. My practice hasn't changed much, but my understanding of other people's practice has shifted. And I would be a fierce advocate for people to be open to the possibility of the intercession of the saints. I would probably be more fierce if I did it myself, but I will certainly defend other Christians who do so. So there you go. Don, my friend who I don't know, maybe I don't know if he's Roman Catholic, and if he's the one who's taught, maybe he's taught me something today that maybe in the Roman Catholic faith and maybe in the Orthodox traditions, we name churches after saints with the hope that they will be the ones who intercede for us. Now, also the whole concept of canonization within the Episcopal Church, there's no such thing, and so it's a total mess. Just FYI. But again, I'm much less interested in a formal process of canonization and much more interested in a baptismal reality in which we recognize our sainthood and the sainthood of those of the baptized. That to me is a much more appropriate incarnation of sainthood. Okay. Lisa, I have very little understanding of icons. My understanding that I do have from those that I've talked to, they would say they do not pray to icons, they pray through icons. That the icon, that both the painting of the icon, which is a term for that, they call them writing icons, I think, and the praying with the icons is that it's as if you're not looking at this thing and praying to it. It's that you're looking through it, and through that process, you have the capacity to see outside of this corporeal reality and into the heavenly realms, and to be connected to God that way. That's my understanding of icon praying. Again, it's an intellectual understanding, not an experiential one. So I want to be careful about how I speak about that. Okay. Don has a second question that normally I would not answer two questions from a person at the same time. I would kind of want to skip through, but he asked them in a row, and I'm going to do it. And also, it's a totally different question, and I think it's a really good one. Okay, and it's going to lead to the question after that. How about that? How do you like that, Don? All right, and then Greg and Ryan's questions are coming up after that, and then Lisa, and then I've got a couple anonymous questions, so we'll see how it goes. Kathy Baggett mentioned that the goofiest hymn in the hymnal, I Sing a Song of the Saints of God. Just an absolutely ridiculous hymn. But at least it's a dumb tune. That's rude. That was rude. Don't make fun of what other people love. That's not helpful, Phil. Okay. Gosh, we have so many good questions today. I got one from Leslie as well. Leslie, your question is thoughtful and detailed, and I've got to figure out where it fits. Here's the good news. If we don't get through all of them today, we will get at them next week, okay? Dawn's second question. Kind of hyper today. I hope you noticed. I think I'm so excited because like last week we started off pretty hard, and then the week before that I wasn't even sure if anyone was here because the live chat was broken. And so I'm excited to like have you with me and have like hard questions to answer. Dawn says, is there room in Christianity for consequentialism? Dawn, I had to look that up. I am not very smart. Can good ends justify evil means? For example, is it justifiable to break sworn secrecy to expose a wrong? Consequentialism is, he kind of describes it in the next sentence, good ends justifying evil means, which is to say, consequentialism is similar to utilitarianism. If the result is good, then does it really matter how we got there? Can someone be Christian and believe that the ends justify the means? Oh my gosh, I can't wait to answer this question. My answer is probably there are Christians who think that. I would never say that you asked, is there room in Christianity for it? Man, there's room in Christianity for all sorts of heresy. So why not that one? I'm only 3/4 joking. There's a quarter that's super serious. I think it's really important to have room in our Christian shared life for all sorts of ideas that actually don't fit within the orthodoxy. Not because I think they're correct, like consequentialism to me is not correct, but because The primary import of our faith, our shared faith, is the relationship with God that is lived out in our community. The Christian faith is not something one can practice alone. It is a faith that is meant to be experienced in shared life. And if the only way that we can experience that shared life is if everyone agrees about everything or is on the same page about everything, then we will never actually experience it in any real and honest way. So do I think that there's room within Christianity for consequentialism? I do. Do I think consequentialism makes sense? I have issues with it, and I'd like to talk about that. But let me just kind of round out what I was saying. I find it tempting to think that Christianity is a set of dogma, because I'm a huge fan of dogma. I've said this in previous episodes, so if you think I'm kidding, I am not kidding. I love dogma. But if we think that the Christianity is just the dogma itself, the reality is Christianity is first and foremost the community of the saints, sanctified, consecrated by God, set apart to share life and do the work of Jesus Christ in this world by the power of the Holy Spirit and led by that same Spirit. There's much room for systematic theology and much room for philosophical questions. So to me, the idea is Christianity is a room in Christianity. There's room in Christianity for conversations around these things. Is consequentialism compatible with the life of Jesus? That might be a different question that I probably would say no to. I'm one of those white guys who likes to quote Martin Luther King Jr. a lot and makes me feel woke, but probably makes other people cringe. And if I ever use him inappropriately, I hope you'll feel comfortable telling me. But I also am just really in love with his writing and have learned a lot about what I believe about God through Dr. King's sermons and writings. I haven't read all of them. I'm not an expert, but I have been profoundly impacted in my understanding of my theology based on the way that he not only lived, but wrote. Dr. King said, love is not just the destination. Love is the way to get there. Love is the road. Jesus says, I am the way, the truth, and the life. The idea that we don't need Jesus, for instance, so let's take consequentialism to its natural ends. The most important thing is get to heaven. I don't actually think that, but let's just say that for a second. The most important thing is get to heaven. And it's a big deal, right? Because look, you're only on earth for a certain amount of time, but if there is an eternal life and then you have a choice and heaven's the place you get to go, like, let's be clear. If there's a heaven and a hell and you die and you go to one of them forever, that actually is a really big deal, right? It's a big deal. So maybe me getting to heaven is the only thing, the biggest thing. Because it's eternity, it's forever. And here's only like somewhere between 0 and 100 years. Out of eternity, that's nothing. So is there a way that I can get to heaven without having to do the work, as it were? Or how do I get to heaven? Because that's the question the disciples ask. How do we get there? What's the way there? And Jesus says, I am the way there. And some Christians have read that to mean, oh, so you have to believe the right thing to go to heaven. But Jesus describing himself as the way, and that word hodos, way is like street, avenue. And the first Christians, before they were called Christians, it was referred to as a community that followed the way. The implication being an action of following, of patterning your life in a specific way, of living life in a specific way. You cannot get where you're going without living love. You can't get to a loving outcome, which is the absolute goal of the Christian life and faith. The sharing in the eternal love of God is the end. The way there is through love. You don't get there by any other means. You can't cheat your way into that. And any success that we find in this world that requires us to act unlovingly to get there is a false success. So Lisa Grubbs brings up a particularly sensitive and bombastic example. Bombing the abortion clinic kills these people but saves millions of unborn lives is the idea, right? Even if you believe that abortion is murder, murdering people who murder people to show that murdering people is bad, that is not consequent. That does not seem consistent with the Christian faith at all. The death penalty is absolutely incompatible with Christianity. I don't care what anyone says. We worship a guy who was murdered, capital punishment. And I don't like conservative liberal. I don't care. Like, that's absurd that we at all can come up with reasons why we think that that is a punishment. Now, Phil, what about World War II and the Nazis and things like that? This is a troubling territory. And I think Augustine does a lot of work with this. He creates, you recall, Augustine creates this concept of just war, but we want to recognize that Augustine is working. So Augustine says, like, there are times in which war, for instance, is the best case scenario. But we want to be clear that when he does that, he's trying to describe a scenario in which every situation and every choice you have is bad. And by the way, he's describing a situation in which every single one of your choices is sinful. So how do you choose the best choice among all choices that are sinful? When you're in a world that only gives you bad options, how do you choose an option that is the best bad option, as it were, right? Like, how do we do that? How do we choose the best bad option? I think we might find ourselves in a position where we feel the need to do that. I think we might find ourselves in a position where we might say, I don't like this, but I think we should do it. That doesn't mean the Christian has to therefore say it's good. A Christian might say, this grieves me that we have to do this. And there's sin in it. And we don't see a sinless way forward. Now, at the same time, there is and always has been a robust movement for all nonviolence, for nonviolent response, which is oftentimes called pacifism, but nonviolent response, no matter what, an insistence on nonviolent response. There's always been a robust movement within Christianity. At some points in Christianity, that was the norm. I'm not here to pick sides on that one today, mainly because I go back and forth all the time. But I want to go back to how I started, which is to say, love is not just the destination, love is the way to get there. You don't get to do evil and pretend that it will immediately bring good. There might be good that it brings. Understand that evil will come alongside it. People who live by the sword die by the sword, and you might be able to accomplish good things with that sword. But if you think that it will just be all good, I don't think that that's possible. I don't believe that. I believe that the means, the ends justify the means conversation, the means of how we accomplish what we accomplish are the purpose of the Christian faith. The Christian faith is about us sharing life here and now. How can we make the decision for ourselves to recognize our shared belongingness and belovedness? How can I decide to be obedient to Jesus and follow him and connect myself to a community that does the same? Lisa, I think it's for everything. Is it for governments or for individuals? Killing looters, killing because you feel threatened? I mean, I think these are the questions that we have to ask. I think if we treat individuals as such and understand that each individual is making these decisions, it forces us to not demonize people, but to humanize them. And that's not fun. I'd rather demonize people, because then I can stick them in their box and think all I want to think about them. And isn't it fun to just be filled with such righteous hatred for others? And I feel so good and validated in my rightness by being disgusted by people who are so obviously wrong. But the Christian life that we're talking about insists on love. I find it fascinating when we have these conversations and when we talk about this, that we're so often thinking about what others should be doing. And I think what's essential is what the Christian life, the claim that it places on you, if you are a Christian, for what it requires of you. And we immediately want to think about what our country should do, or what our president should do, or what some other person should do, and how they're not good enough Christians, or how they should be, or how our church should be something, or how our city should be something. And those are just conversations. They are important, just as in feel like right and correct things to be wondering, so long as we are devoting ourselves personally to following Jesus. The Christian life is not designed for us to simply sit on the balcony and look down and go, well, I think the ends justified the means on this one, or I think those people were wrong about that, or this people were right about this. I think the Christian life is found in mine and your shared experience of life and how we live it together. Theology and philosophy, which are fantastic ways of working out the loving of the Lord our God with all our mind, can also sometimes, when we're not careful, be distractions from the actual work. My dad tried to get me really interested he wanted me to go to grad school for acting because I was an actor, right? And he wanted me to go to grad school for acting. He wanted me to go get an MFA, and I did not want to do it. I did not want to do it. And he goes, just think, you could write a whole thesis paper, a whole dissertation just on acting. He thought that was going to be exciting for me. That was horrific to me. Because I was like, I don't want to write about acting. I want to act. Now, there's some worthy writing about acting. There's some really good stuff out there for actors to read about and to think about and to process. I just wanted to act, though. We are set aside for the work of love. It is why we exist. We cannot control the ends. We can only control the means of our own behavior, and we can't even control the means of other people's behavior. This is why we must pray for the serenity to accept the things we cannot change. One of the things we cannot change is how other people behave. We can't even fully fathom the why people do the things that they do. but we can choose to live into love in our daily life, and we can choose to live in a community where we share that life. I will not stop harping on this. This is how Christianity is lived out, how it is spread, and how it gains strength, not through governmental interference and not through me telling other people how they should be, but through people committing to one another and living their lives in interdependence, in shared care, in bearing one another's burdens. This is the way. And I think that we might find that there are things that we do that are wrong, and God still uses them. One of my favorite texts, and this actually comes to a separate question that someone asked, so maybe I'll move to the next question or to another question. Lisa Clemens, I don't know if you're here today, Lisa, but she asks a question. God is said to work in mysterious ways. If he can put a person or an opportunity in your life, what happens if you miss it? If that was part of God's plan for your life, would God have some kind of replacement, or is your life just not what it could have been now? Isn't that a great question? And it is connected in my mind. Here's why. When we think about the way that God works in our life, we continue to think about this structured plan, and God's up here. And our goal, so this goes back to the end justifying the means. Our goal is here, and we're here, of course, right? We're never here. We're here. And we got to try to get here. And maybe we believe that God has set up a structure, staircase, for us to get here. And then all we have to do is find that staircase and walk up that staircase. And then we get to God. The end means. Now, again, do the ends justify the means? So if I can find a special separate ladder that goes over here, or I can, find a secret doorway or knock a secret knock and get in, great. But so God puts someone in your life, and the idea being that might be the person that helps you get to the next step up because you're moving towards God. And if you screw that up, does God have like a plan B? And like, oh no, or like, are you just screwed up? And we have Christians who believe that if you don't live your life just right, you're not living according to God's plan, that your life isn't what it's supposed to be. And if you want your life to be what it's supposed to be, you need to change your life and shift to God's God's plan, and then you'll be fine. And then things will kind of click into gear, and then everything will work the way it's supposed to work. Oh, what garbage. It's a very tempting garbage. It's very beautiful garbage. It's garbage. And I've fallen into this trap so many times. So it's a phenomenal question, Lisa. Here's what I would want to suggest. We believe in the God of, are you ready for this? It's coming up in December. We believe in the God of Advent. Okay? And that word Advent comes from the Latin literally meaning coming, like showing up, entering. Okay? Advent, we celebrate God coming into the world. First in the incarnation of Jesus Christ, and then in the second coming, at the end of all things. Okay? In both cases, we understand Jesus as showing up in our lives. We understand Jesus as entering into our already existing reality. Okay? So instead of thinking about God up here and you down here, and God then gives you the appropriate blocks, right? God gives you building blocks. And then you have to set the blocks up just right so you can climb up them to get to God. And then if you knock one over or you don't set them up right, you don't get to go to God, and you really screwed it up. And maybe you get kind of close to God, but you're not really there, right? What if your blocks are all over? God gives you blocks and they're all over the place and you're a total effing mess. But God comes into your life and is working in your life at all times and in all ways. The idea that you are interacting with God on a daily basis. God's plan for you, as far as I understand it, is that you experience love and that you live a life of love. And there are times when you're going to deviate from that. And you will experience the consequences of that. But the idea that you have this hypothetical life you could have lived or could still live if you just do everything right, and that you're deprived of if you do a bunch of stuff wrong, is not consistent with the lives of the saints in our scriptures, is not consistent with the narrative of our Bible. Plenty of people do very wrong things and are rewarded. Plenty of people do very right things and their lives fall apart because it's real. That's actually how we experience life, right? So this idea that God puts these things in your life, and if you miss them, then you've missed this opportunity, and then it's just a ship that sailed. Maybe it is. Maybe it's a missed opportunity. But the suggestion that God wouldn't then be consistently putting other things in your life that are about filling your life with the love for which you were made. We have to get away from this thinking of trying to accomplish a specific kind of life, trying to accomplish or achieve our salvation, trying to accomplish or achieve the right kind of life. And open our eyes to God's presence in our life as it is. How does that shift things? I connected this question to the previous question of consequentialism because we are tempted always to take a step outside of it and look at it and try to figure out how it all works, and then try to figure out how we can do the right thing so that we can make things easier or better or live the right way. The implication being, of course, that the reason things are going poorly is because we've lived the wrong way, or because if we don't get it right, we won't be in God's grace. We are in God's grace. We belong to God. And you are not a rat in a maze or running an obstacle course with God every once in a while giving you helping hands. But if you miss God's hand, then you don't get through the obstacle course. I just don't think that's a fair burden to place on us, but it's the burden we place on ourselves quite often. Quite often. So, okay. I'd like you to think about what it looks like to believe in a God who is always coming into your life, wherever you are, whatever a mess it is, or however good it's going, whichever one. What does that look like? Yeah. I have 2 more questions from my thread, and then I have some other questions that were asked me. I will have to save them for another time because we've only got 10 more minutes. These 2 questions are connected to Lisa's question, and they're connected to one another. My friend Greg asks the question, how do you resolve theodicy? Theodicy is the idea of how does God, if God is all-knowing and God is all-powerful and God is all good, why is there evil in the world? Or just theodicy is just why is there evil in the world? It could be another way to look at it. If God is the God that we've conceived traditionally in the Christian faith as all good and all-powerful and all-knowing, then why is there evil? That is the question. So he's asking, how do you resolve that? Thanks for the softball, Greg. And then Ryan Andrews, another friend, asks similarly, if God exists and loves us, why is everything so shitty right now? Are we being tested? Those questions are connected, as you can see. You don't resolve theodicy. It's unresolvable. It's an incoherency that strains the credulity of our faith lives. It is the central complaint that of the Christian God that has driven so many people out of the church and out of lives of faith. I think any version of resolving it that you see is, to me, unpersuasive and convenient. I don't think we get to understand this one. And that really pisses us off. Western Christians, and I think especially white Western Christians in the aftermath of the quote unquote age of enlightenment, the age of reason, so to speak, have come to believe that if it's real, we should be able to understand it and explain it. And if we cannot understand it or explain it, it must not be any good. And I find this to be something that is our fault, this is where I believe we are faulty, not God. Our inability to understand God's godness is fine. It's okay. But we don't like it. We don't understand how God could allow for this to be the case, for the world to have shittiness going on, as Ryan says. We're mad that God could allow us to destroy ourselves and one another. God, if there is a God, as Ryan said, if God exists and loves us, apparently the God who exists and loves us has given us the choice to make in how we choose to live. I want to be really careful with how Christians talk about free will or how Americans talk about freedom, because we have pretty funny ideas of those. But I will say that God loves in freedom, which is to say God loves us. God chooses to love us, and God is free to choose not to, but God chooses to love us. And so in that freedom, we are being modeled what it means for us to experience freedom and love, which is we have the choice not to love. We have the choice not to love. Why did God give us that choice? Be sure to ask God when you get there. But the reality is that we have a choice. God's work is mysterious. That seems like the word, God's mysteries as a cop-out. But really, genuinely, this is an area where I think Jews are way better than Christians. Like way better than Christians. Generally, the Christians that I know and the Jews that I know anyway. Because at least as a people, Jews are completely open to the possibility that God does all sorts of things they don't like and don't understand, and God's still God. But oh my gosh, white Western Christians, if God is still God, then God must do things that I understand completely, or he's not God anymore. The Jews are perfectly, at least the ones, again, the religious Jews that I know, it's built into the faith that God's works and ways are things that are unknowable to you. And we think that because God has been revealed to us in Jesus Christ, and we have a name that we can attach God to, Jesus, and we have a person that we can experience, Jesus, then somehow that means that God should be more understandable, which is absurd because people are the least understandable things in the universe. That God would reveal God's self fully in a human that is Jesus, and therefore we think we can understand God better? Have you met people? Have you ever met a person? They're impossible to understand. We can love them, but if your love for someone is contingent upon your understanding of them, you, my friend, are, I think the biblical term is screwed. That's not doable. You can't, our love for people cannot be contingent upon our understanding them. And our love of God cannot be contingent upon our understanding of God. Because if it is, we will never love God. And we'll never love ourselves, and we'll never love our neighbor. We have to learn to accept mystery. I'm not trying to chide Greg for asking the question, or Ryan. These are important questions. I just want to say that asking it is important, but expecting an answer is problematic in this case. So asking how, I don't think you resolve theodicy. I don't think theodicy is something for you to resolve. I think it is something for you to work at and wrestle with and to live into the question of it and to try to understand it. And then finally, when all else fails, to let it down, drop it, and just hold on for dear life to God and those around you that matter. It's my understanding that Greg, who asked this question, is about to have a second child, maybe even today, maybe it's already been born. And my answer is kind of like not that heady. Like, how do you resolve theodicy? By holding your baby, man. Like, that's my actual crappy pastor answer. It's just like, look at your wife and love her. Get to work on that. I don't mean for that to be a cop-out. We have a right, whatever that means. We have the capacity to ask these questions, and we should push and challenge ourselves. And also, when we try to hold all of this mystery at once, it's overwhelming. And you and I are charged with the work of caring for people right in front of us. That is more important. And we may come to new understandings of how God works. I think you understand God more fully by engaging in love than you do thinking about God. Leslie says, we have the choice because the landscaping in Eden looked real nice with the tree in an easily accessible area, and God didn't want to redesign the whole thing. That's right. That's right. So God's like, it's perfect. I don't want to screw it up. So choice. We're creating this choice thing. Before I finish, Ryan, why is everything so shitty right now? Is God testing us? I don't believe God works that way, and I don't think you do either in your heart. I also want us to recognize that across the world, outside of America especially, a lot of beautiful things are happening. And even within America, in the midst of so much pain, fear, and suffering, beautiful things are happening. Not just new lives being born, but new people being called into the work of justice, new people standing up and finding their voice, people who've never had a voice before being given their voice, and people fighting for their voice, people standing up and recognizing their own belongingness and belovedness and blessedness in a way they never have before. We are at the dawn of a new time that has the capacity to be the most spectacular time in our history if we survive. And I would say things are pretty shitty right now, a lot of it because we've done a lot of shitty things. A lot of what we are experiencing is the natural, not the punishment of God, not you've been bad, so I'm cursing you, but the natural consequences of our actions. We choose to live in unjust and inequitable societies that thrive off the marginalization of others, and then are shocked when that harms us. We choose to live in a way that doesn't recognize our natural responsibility to steward the earth with care, and then are shocked when everything catches on fire and floods. We choose to uphold white supremacy as a people, and then are shocked when we're led by white supremacists who lead us into polarized and dangerous places. We choose flashiness over substance, and then are shocked when we have a culture that doesn't even believe news when it's right in front of us, respects no real authority but our own. We idolize individualism, and then are shocked when our idolization of individualism creates an inability to accept our collective responsibility for one another. Now that can lead you down a really cynical road. And that's why I started by saying there are so many beautiful things happening in this world and in your life and in mine. Yes, we have a job to speak truth to power. Yes, we have a job to fight for justice. And also, there is so much beauty in recognizing the justice that's coming to fruition. There's so much beauty in opening our eyes to see the holiness of the people around us, the presence of God dwelling among us in the people around us. And if we are living in such a way that we aren't able to recognize the beauty and the belonging and the presence of God in those around us, which is to say the blessedness of the people around us, if we're not able to realize that, then that's part of the work that we've got to do. Change the way that we're viewing the world so that we are able to recognize God's vitality. That does not guarantee that things won't be shitty. It doesn't even guarantee that our country or our world survives. I'm sorry, it doesn't. But it focuses us on the here and now and what our part is to play. I'm going to stop. As usual, your questions are phenomenal, and they are all poorly answered. I'd like to have done better. But I'm so grateful to have you guys here. Thanks, Anne, for being here. Thank you, Leslie. Thank you, Lisa and Betsy. So good to be with you, and Kathy and anyone else who joined for a bit, or if you watch this later. Thanks, Dan and Ryan and Greg and Lisa for the questions. Leslie, we'll get to your question next week. And the other person's questions and our anonymous questions that we've seen, I'll work on getting to those as soon as I can, those that I think I'm able to respond to appropriately. You all are a joy, and this work is a joy for me. I keep wondering how long we're going to keep it up. Will I keep doing this? And, does it have a sufficient enough, is it resonating sufficiently enough and cultivating a community sufficiently enough that it is an appropriate use of our shared time, is a question I sometimes ask because I want to get this right. But your questions and your thoughts and your responses and your kindness and your presence keep it going, and I appreciate that. So anything that I say is not the final say, right? You can always shoot more questions to me, specifically responding to things that I said or asking more questions, and we can delve and go deeper and try to understand. It's the work, it's the wrestling together that makes the difference. That's what I really think. So, try to listen to some Dwight Yoakam today if you can. Some Dwight Yoakam. No reason. He's just glorious. He's just absolutely beautiful. That's all. There's no it's not his birthday. He didn't die. Nothing like that. He's just Dwight Yoakam, and he's fantastic. So try to listen to some Dwight Yoakam this week, y'all. And we'll check in next week. Same bat time, same bat channel. Invite people, ask questions. Let's get to work. I'll see you next week. Love you all. Take care. Bye now.